The History of Human Emotions by Tiffany Watt Smith. I would like to begin with a little experiment. In a moment, I'm going to ask if you would close your eyes and see if you can work out what emotions you're feeling right now. Now, you're not going to tell anyone or anything. The idea is to see how easy or perhaps hard you two find it to pinpoint exactly what you're feeling. And I thought I would give you 10 seconds to do this. Okay, right, let's start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, that's it. Time's up. How did it go? You were probably feeling a little bit under pressure, maybe suspicious of the person next to you. Did they definitely have their eyes closed? Perhaps you felt some strange, distant worry about that email you sent this morning, or excitement about something you've got planned for this evening. Maybe you felt that acceleration that comes when we get together in the big groups of people like this. The Welsh called it haul, from the word for boat sails. Or maybe you felt all of these things. There are some emotions which wash the world in a single color, like the terror felt as a car skid. But more often, our emotions crowd and jostle together until it is actually quite hard to tell them apart. Some slide past so quickly you would hardly even notice them, like the nostalgia that will make you reach out to grab a familiar brand in a supermarket. And then there are others that we hurry away from, fearing that they will burst on us, like the jealousy that causes you to search a loved one's pockets. And of course, there are some emotions which are so peculiar, you might not even know what they call them. Perhaps sitting there, you had a little tingle of a desire for the emotion one eminent French psychologist called illness, the delirium that comes with a minor act of chaos. If you stood up right now and emptied the contents of your bag all over the floor, perhaps you experienced one of these odd, untranslatable emotions for which there's no obvious English equivalent. You might have felt the feelings the Dutch called gezelligheid, being cozy and warm inside with friends when it's cold and damp outside. Maybe if you were really lucky, you felt this, busorexia, a sudden urge to kiss someone. We live in an age when knowledge of emotions is an extremely important commodity, where emotions are used to explain many things, exploited by our politicians, manipulated by algorithms. Emotional intelligence, which is the skill of being able to recognize and name your own emotions and those of other people, is considered so important that this is taught in our schools and businesses and encouraged by our health services. But despite all of this, I sometimes wonder if the way we think about emotions is being impoverished. Sometimes we're not even that clear what the emotion even is. You probably heard of theory that our entire emotional lives can be boiled down to a handful of basic emotions. This idea is actually about 2,000 years old, but in our own time, some evolutionary psychologists have suggested that these 6 emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, surprise, are expressed by everyone across the globe in exactly the same way, and therefore represent the building blocks of our entire emotional lives. Well, if you look at an emotion like this, then it looks like a simple reflex. It's triggered by an external predicament. It's hardwired. It's there to protect us from harm. So you see a bear, your heart rate quickens, your pupil dilate, and you feel frightened. You run very, very fast. The problem with this picture is it doesn't entirely capture what an emotion is. Of course, the physiology is extremely important, but it's not the only reason why we feel the way we do at any given moment. What if I was to tell you that in the 12th century, some troubadours didn't see yawning as caused by tiredness or boredom, like we do today, but thought it's a symbol of a deepest love? Or that in that same period, brave men, knights, commonly fainted out of dismay? What if I was to tell you that some early Christians who lived in the desert believed that flying demons, who mainly came out of at lunchtime, could infect them with an emotion they called acity, a kind of lengthery that was sometimes so intense it could even kill them? Or that boredom, as we know and love it today, was first really only felt by the Victorians in response to new ideas about leisure time and self improvement. What if we were to think again about those odd, untranslatable words for emotions and wonder whether some cultures might feel an emotion more intensely just because they've bothered to name and talk about it? Like the Russian Tosca, a feeling of maddening dissatisfaction said to blow in from the Great Plains. The most recent developments in cognitive science show that the emotions are not simple reflexes, but immensely complex, elastic systems that respond both to the biologies that we've inherited into the cultures that we live in now. Cognitive phenomena. They are shaped not just by our bodies, but by our thoughts, our concepts, our language. The neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett has become very interested in this dynamic relationship between words and emotions. She argues that when we learn a new word for emotion, new feelings are sure to follow. As a historian, I've long suspected that as language changes, our emotions do too. When we look to the past, it's easy to see that emotions have changed, sometimes very dramatically, in response to new cultural expectations and religious beliefs, new ideas about gender, ethnicity, and age, even in response to new political and economic ideologies. There's a historicity to emotions that we are only recently starting to understand. So I agree absolutely that it does us good to learn new words for emotions, but I think we need to go further. I think to be truly emotionally intelligent, we need to understand where those words have come from and what ideas about how we ought to live and behave they are smuggling along with them. Let me tell you a story. It begins in a garret in the late 17th century in the Swiss university town of Basel. Inside, there is a dedicated student living some 60 miles away from home. He stops turning up to his lectures, and his friends come to visit and they find him dejected and feverish, having heart palpitations, strange sores breaking out on his body. Doctors are called, and they think it's so serious that prayers are said for him in the local church. And it's only when they are preparing to return this young man home so that he can die that they realized what's going on, because once they lift him onto the stretcher, his breathing becomes less labored. And by the time he's got to the gates of his hometown, he's almost entirely recovered. And that's when they realize that he's been suffering from very powerful form of homesickness. It's so powerful that it might have killed him. Well, in 1688, a young doctor, Johannes Hofer, heard of this case and others liked it and chastened the illness nostalgia. Well, in 1688, a young doctor, Johannes Hofer, heard of this case and others liked it and christened the illness nostalgia. The diagnosis quickly caught on this medical circles around Europe. The English actually thought they were probably immune because of all the trouble they did in the empire and so on. But soon there were cases cropping up in Britain too. The last person to die from nostalgia was an American soldier fighting during the First World War in France. How is it possible that you could die from nostalgia less than 100 years ago? But today, not only does the word mean something different, a sickening for a lost time rather than a lost place, but homesickness itself is seen as less serious, sort of downgraded from something you could die from to something you're mainly worried your kid might be suffering from at a sleepover. This change seems to have happened in early 20th century. But why? Was it the invention of telephones or the expansion of the railways? Was it perhaps the coming of modernity with its celebration of restlessness and trouble and progress that made sickening for the familiar seem rather unambiguous? You and I inherited that massive transformation in values, and it's one reason why we might not feel homesickness today as accurately as we used to. It's important to understand that these large historical changes influence our emotions partly because they affect how we feel about how we feel. Today, we celebrate happiness. Happiness is supposed to make us better workers and parents and partners. It's supposed to make us live longer. In the 16th century, sadness was thought to do most of those things. It's even possible to read self-help books from that period which try to encourage sadness in readers by giving them lists of reasons to be disappointed. These self-help authors thought you could cultivate sadness as a skill since being expert in it would make you more resilient when something bad did happen to you, as invariably it would. I think we could learn from this today. Feel sad today, and you might feel impatient, even a little ashamed. Feel sad in the 16th century, and you might feel a little bit smug. Of course, our emotions don't just change across time, they also change from place to place. The binding people of Papua New Guinea speak of book, a feeling of lengthery that descends when the house guest finally leaves. Now you or I might feel relief, but in binding culture, Departing guests are thought to shed a sort of heaviness so they can travel more easily, and this heaviness infects the air and causes this umbuk. What they do is leave a bowl of water out overnight to absorb this air, and then even very early in the next morning, they wake up and have a ceremony and throw the water away. There are similar ideas about emotional pollution in many cultures, but the binding practice is unique. It gives the emotion a shape and duration, something to do with it, and a way of marking its end. Emotions are deeply cultural. They can be sites of solidarity or isolation, of resilience or vulnerability, depending on where and when you live. So, why does this matter? Because we live in a time when emotions are hugely powerful, political, economically, socially. If we think emotions are just fixed biological reflexes, we misunderstand their role in our history and culture. We might even understand ourselves, mistaking an emotional response that's historical and cultural for one that's entirely individual. But I think there's another reason too. Today, more than ever before, emotions are seen as things we should be in control of and responsible for. And if we fail to do so, we might feel as though we failed as people. So if there's one thing that history teaches us about emotions, it's that they are not never just individual. They're also collective and cultural. And that means that they are changeable. So next time you feel sad or homesick or nostalgic, try not to beat yourself up. Think of Johannes Hofer in Basel, or the binding of Papua New Guinea, and give yourself a little bit of historical perspective. Think of your emotions not just as yours, but as ours. Not just as nature, but as culture. Thank you.